In many ways, the world's no longer the dark and depressing place it once was, but at the same time, regardless of all the progress we might have made, there's always something that holds us back. In this video, we're going to talk about the increasingly controversial debate around the inclusion of transgender athletes in sports, and why those who have problems with them simply need to chill out and become more inclusive of them. First, where does all this doubt stem from? The transgender athletic debate has its roots in murky origins, but basically, after doing a lot of research, we realized it can loosely be divided into two groups: those who advocate for fairness and inclusivity, regardless of biological gender, and those who say they're being fair, but their arguments are deeply conservative with their gender binary thinking. This situation gets even more complicated when we realize that the wider sports world technically has no guidelines regarding the inclusion of transgender athletes in sporting competitions. So it's basically a free-for-all. Those who are anti-inclusion cite scientific research and supposed evidence that backs their claims. However, there's little to no research that proves those athletes that transition will have an upper hand in the competition over their cisgender counterparts. Confusing? Let's break it down. Basically, this camp holds the view that transgender females hold a significant amount of superiority over their fellow cisgender female competitors because they still possess traces of physiological advantages that men acquire when going through puberty. This means that transgender females who transition possess unique advantages that make them better at sports. Wait, what? Yep, this thinking has begun to warp the inclusion of transgender athletes in competitive sports, and it isn't far behind in influencing legislation. In the United States, the Trump administration had sought to reduce protections for transgender people in healthcare, the military, and other social welfare institutions. Thanks to Trump's poorly disguised transphobia, there was a sharp spike in hate crimes against transgender people across the United States. Next, is there any truth to these claims? Well, this is a tricky question to answer, especially since there's very little available science on the matter. What we do know is that a lot of this anti-trans sloganeering has little to do with science and fact, and more to do with exclusionary feelings and transphobia. Think about it this way: the anti-trans athlete movement is based on the fact that it isn't fair for transgender women to compete because they have an assumed biological advantage over their cisgender counterparts. If we take that argument seriously, there's a high possibility that anyone, regardless of their gender presentation, so that includes cisgender women as well, can be criticized as being too good an athlete to be considered real women. As Dr. Eric Villain puts it, it's like saying Usain Bolt's abilities are unfair because he wins by so much each time. Additionally, the fears of the anti-trans squad have been centered around the idea that soon, all sports fields will eventually be dominated by transgender athletes, and real men and women will no longer be able to compete. We have no words for this. If anything, these claims do nothing to try and make the sporting world a more equitable and level playing field, but instead play into fears and misconceptions like the bathroom predator myth that has plagued the transgender community for centuries. Next up, how do these claims affect the sporting careers of other women? To make matters worse by reinforcing the stereotype and the belief that transgender women can't be included in female sporting events, the effect of this decision doesn't only affect transgender competitors, but it also negatively impacts any and all cisgender women competing. This is because the idea that transgender athletes are too strong implicitly suggests that cisgender women are too weak and delicate, and therefore need to be protected against any and all other genders. Not only does this damage any and all sporting integrity by refusing to allow people to compete in their specified categories, but it also weakens the credibility of female sports, relegating them to stereotypes of weak and boring sports. Fighting against the exclusionary behavior works in everyone's favor, in and all areas of the sports, both competitive and non-competitive. Sports policy experts have argued that by excluding subsets of girls from sports and encouraging definition divisiveness and petty arguments over who really is a girl. Additionally, Dr. Mary Fry believes that if budding athletes grow up in caring and inclusive environments, they're likely to perform better and have a better relationship with sports. Banning girls from sports solely because of their gender identity weakens the spirit of sportsmanship that we believe is the cornerstone of sports. And now, what avenues are being explored in order to ensure better treatment for transgender athletes? Instead of looking at things with a binary of fair and unfair competition, according to researcher Joanna Harper, we should be addressing the situation through the lens of meaningful competition. What does that mean? Let's get into it. According to Harper, the obsession that the anti-trans body has with advantages is pretty baseless, because certain advantages are allowed in sports. For example, when we look at baseball, the way the field is set up actually allows left-handed players to perform better in comparison to their right-handed counterparts. This advantage is acknowledged and allowed. At the same time, though, if we take the example of boxing, heavyweight boxers cannot get into the ring with flyweight boxers because the heavyweight will have a clear and obvious upper hand because of their weight, and they will win every time. That's unfair competition. When we apply this logic to the controversy between trans and cisgender women, people have argued that it isn't fair, citing reasons like higher rates of hemoglobin, muscle mass, etc. But the thing is, according to research and according to Harper, these claims are made in a universal scale, not taking into the account that A, there needs to be in-depth research on a sport-by-sport basis that'll allow for greater understanding and therefore meaningful competition. B, the fear that transgender women are going to take over the sporting world is so silly because there's no evidence to suggest that they will now or in the future. So relax, guys. Up next, what do LGBTQ+ activists and trans athletes themselves have to say about all all this. Activists have slammed these bans as discriminatory, and rightfully so. They say that due to these bans, there will probably be less participation from trans athletes on all levels. Not only do trans people engage in less exercise than their non-trans peers, but these bans will also serve as yet another barrier to their sporting careers, discouraging them from pursuing their dreams. In addition to these Canadian trans cyclists, Veronica Ivy, the first trans woman to win the UCI Masters World Track Cycling Championship in 2018, has labeled anti-trans sporting policy as unscientific. Her stance was supported by British trans racing car driver Charlie Martin, who said that banning trans people from competing in sporting events was wrong, and the solution of the open sports category was not a solution at all, because it placed trans women in a weird limbo that could end their careers. Along with this, American rugby player Naima Reddick argued that the International Rugby League's policy of not allowing trans women to compete in the same category as cisgender women was unfair and unethical, because it blatantly ignored the body diversity that already existed among cisgender rugby women players. Make difference in body size is a flimsy excuse upon which the IRL's trans ban is resting. And finally, what policies have been put in place to facilitate transgender athletes in sporting competitions? Well, this is disappointing, but things have actually become more difficult for transgender athletes if they want to take part in any major sporting events. Notably, bans have been implemented at elite-level swimming and rugby events, with suspicions that other sporting bodies may be following suit soon. FINA, an international body that governs swimming globally, announced that trans women who experience male puberty will be barred from competing in any and all female categories. This is the most restrictive set of rules to have been issued by an Olympic sporting body. FINA claimed that these rules and a new open category will protect the fairness of the Olympics. However, trans men will still be permitted to compete without any restrictions. Wow, that's more than unfair. These limitations have already begun to impact the sporting careers of trans athletes. U.S. transgender swimmer Leah Thomas, who competed for her anniversary men's swimming team before transition, faced backlash post-transition because she broke several women's collegiate swimming records. Her dreams of becoming a part of the U.S. Olympic swimming team were crushed by FINA's new policy, and now she cannot compete internationally. Trans cyclist Emily Bridges has also been barred from British championships because the cycling governing body, the ICU, said she was registered as a male cyclist and could not compete as a woman. The situation is looking bleak for trans athletes. Let's hope it gets better soon. That's a wrap for this video. What do you think? How can the playfield be more equitable? Do you think that trans women should be allowed to compete in the same categories as cisgender women? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.